courtesy of my good friend at Kings Lynn Models. The package arrived today, which is hopefully going to be, because I haven't ordered anything else, my Overlander motor. If you recall, in an earlier video I said I was going to be using my E-Flight Power 25, because I have one, well, I've got two actually laying around, but that wouldn't be fair on people who haven't got that motor watching me deal with something they haven't got. And a lot of people, I think, will go for this this motor. So like I say, I think a lot of people may well be looking at this motor as a suitable one for this model. It's a 3548. Just trying to remember what the kV is on it. It is 900 kV. So that produces 710 watts, which should be perfectly adequate for this model. When I say it's going to be about between 4 and 5 pounds. If you said 5 pounds, usually say about 100 watts per pound. That's 500 watts. This has got plenty of oomph. So be flying around probably on half throttle, or no more than 3/4 throttle most of the time. I do like Overlander motors, I must admit. I've got them on several models. Also like Hobby King motors as well. They're good, and I've certainly got some of their larger ones on models that were probably designed for a glow or a petrol engine, and they're also very good. Anyway, I'm waffling on. Let's get to what we've got to do. So the motor mount is here, and what I've done is on the motor mount plate I've marked the center line, horizontal and vertical. What I need to do now is to measure the distance, or be easier to look at the instructions that came with the motor, easier than me to measure, which gives me the whole distance of the motor mount here. So we're looking at 29 millimeters, say 30, 15 either side. So marking this 15 and 15, and again go down here 15 and 15. So if I just draw a line through there and a corresponding line through there, 15. I know it's not 15, it's 14.9, but hey, oops, just measure it there. Go add 15 there, 15 there, 10, 15, 10, 15. So again, do my marking down there. And what I've got, when I draw the diagonals, because it makes it easier to line up and make sure the diagonals intersect my center line there, I've now got the markings along which the motor mount will be positioned. So let me just zoom in on that. There, so there's my motor mount, and what I'm going to do now is make sure when I'm lining it up, you can see that the diagonal lines intersect these mounting holes, and the same down there as well. So that will tell me if my measurements were correct, which they are. So my cross section, my cross lines here are spot on where the holes need to be drilled for the mounting. The fixings you get in the motor, or with the motor, you get some small screws here which are screws to mount the motor mount onto the back of the motor like that, and for the prop driver to mount on the front of the motor like that. That's what the screws are for. They don't provide screws or bolts to fit the motor mount to your plywood. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use T-nuts in this. So I'm going to drill this for my T-nuts. I'll go and look in my spares and parts list, my stock, whatever you want to call it, and this is something that Richard obviously can't provide either in his kit, because he doesn't know which motor you're going to fit. So it would be unfair to complain to Richard that he hasn't provided a part. The other thing I'm going to have to drill out is a center hole here, because the motor shaft protrudes from the back of the motor, so the can spins round, spinning the prop like that, and that sticks through. Now why is it like that? Well, because you can reverse mount on, depending on the model you're putting it into, you can mount the motor using this part to a motor mount there, which the shaft will then protrude through, so the actual can is inside and spins round. Okay, now that can be a problem. That may be a problem for us, or for me, because where the battery's going to go, that may hit on that shaft. There are ways around that. You can reverse these shafts. You dismantle the motor, be very careful, they're very powerful magnets, or you can just cut that shaft off with a disc cutter. They're hardened steel, so a hacksaw, you'll find it hard work with them, so a disc cutter is the ideal thing. A word of warning: when you use a disc cutter, you're going to be spewing out iron filings everywhere. This is a magnet, it will attract them. So the best thing to do is to tape up all these openings in the motor there before you do that, before you cut that shaft off. Rather than, you could obviously take the whole shaft out, dismantle it. There's a clip there which holds the back plate of the motor, and you could take that out and then you could cut it off outside of the motor. But like I say, if you don't want to do that, make sure you tape that up so you can't actually get muck and rubbish going into the motor. I'll do all that off camera. So this is what the motor looks like with the prop adapter added to the front of the prop driver and the motor mount fixed to the back. Okay, so I've also marked on the shaft there where I need to cut it there. So I'm just going to tape that up now, put some more, and this time closer to the shaft, because I don't want anything to get down the side of the shaft into the, I'm not saying into the bearing, but yeah, the potential of getting into the bearing. Last piece in there. Press that down, and now That's good. I can hold the motor there and cut the shaft back to my mark. So I've cut it off, and with the tape removed you can see there that we've got a stub shaft, and I've just rounded the edges off of that as well. With the motor mounted on the ply motor mount, what you're trying to achieve is a minimal protrusion from the back. So you see the shaft there is level with the back of the ply, and the T-nuts are the only thing protruding, and they only protrude about 1 millimetre. No bolts coming through either, because the battery may come down quite close to that. So I've temporarily mounted the ply motor mount behind F1, and the reason for that is I'm trying to determine its exact position based on where the spinner's going to be here. So I've just got the sides clamped in there, and what I'm obviously aiming to try and do is to have not a huge gap between the back of the prop and the cowl ring, and I've got about, I should think about as 7 mil gap. Yeah, that looks pretty good. About there. So let's just put a little pencil mark in there, just so I know how far back I'm sort of looking at. Right, disassemble that all. So the idea is that the mounting plate fits in there like that, and then you can put triangular balsa supports behind it, a balsa rail or offset there in front of it as well, again using scraps out of the box. But the next step I'm going to do, now that I'm happy with how things are marrying up, I'm confident I can now stick Formula 1 in place, and what I'll do is I'll glue it in place with the fuselage on end like that, because I know then that that's going to be perfectly square to the fuselage. And welcome back. I wouldn't say it's freezing cold, but it is. I'm actually now wearing a neck warmer. To be fair, it's warmer than it was yesterday. It's warmed up a bit over the course of the day, a couple of degrees warmer. Anyway, on with the build, which is primarily going to focus on fitting the motor, or continuing the work on fitting the motor. In the last video, the last chapter, I showed how I mounted the motor to the plywood mount and offered it up to the fuselage and marked a temporary mark to give me an indication of where the motor's likely to fit. What I want to do now is to actually progress that and fit the motor permanently. The next step is to actually mark this correctly and mount this correctly into the fuselage. I did mark temporarily some pencil marks on the inside of the fuselage, and I've got some offcuts of balsa that I'm going to clamp in place here and here. There you can just see those two pieces, and the idea is that the motor will sit in the space provided against the balsa blocks there. So I'm just going to temporarily pin those in place, pin or clamp them. get some of my smaller clamps. To be fair, it doesn't really matter if you mark this balsa, it's going to be hidden because the ply cowl is going to mount over the top of it, so it's not a major issue. The problem is, of course, I can't really clamp this in place, the motor, because if I clamp it through here, I can't fit the front cowling, so it's just holding it with my fingers at the moment and just see where it comes. Remembering that, as I said in the last video, the prop there, what I don't want the prop hitting, for obvious reasons, the cowl ring, but I don't want a huge gap between it and the cowl ring. Now that to me looks really good. I've got a gap between the prop and the cowl ring of, I would say, about 3 mil there, which I think is pretty good. So I'm going to now, and that was just not an educated guess, but that was based on the temporary measurement I took in the previous video, and these bits of balsa, which are about 12 millimeters thick from memory, 12 to 13 millimeters thick. So I'm going to stick those now whilst the front of the fuselage dries, in other words the engine mounting plate. What I thought I'd do is I'd now shape the balsa support tongue that fits underneath the fuselage there, fits into the slots in the formers and provides a support for the front of the cowl ring, because you've got to bear in mind this is a belly lander, so the nose is going to come in for quite a bit of hard abuse coming into land. Well, it could do. So this needs to be shaped now so that it will fit into the slot down the bottom there, so that tongue goes through there and sits against the plastic. So I've already drawn the curved shape and the length that's got to come back to, so I'm just going to sand that roughly to shape now. It's got to be done on 2 dimensions. We've got the curve for the round shape of the cowl ring. We've got that curve, but then it has to also curve the other way to fit into the curvature that way of the cowl ring. So I'll get on with that and come back when it's nearly done. Right, so the shape has been cut now, so it's cut to a curve, and it's cut to a curve like that. So now that should fit into there, butting up against that. So now when this is fitted to the underside of the fuselage, so it fits in the slot in the doubler of F2 and fits in the slot of F1. That's in place, and then when I slide the cowl on now, obviously there's a gap there. I need to cut this to length. I'm happy that this goes to the front edge of the cowl here, so now that I know that's the case, I've just got to cut this back. So measuring the gap that I've got, which is 5 millimeters, so I've got to take 5 mil off the end of this here. So So let's just measure 5mm there, and get my square and using the razor saw just cut along that line. And now offer that back up to the fuselage. It is a tight fit, which is good. Still may need a little bit of trimming, just a slight amount of trimming, and what I'll probably do is just trim along the edge here where the ring meets the balsa. Just trim that back a bit there, nearly there. If I keep that pressed against the balsa and just cut, I'm actually cutting the gap, so which makes it a nice good fit there. Yeah, that now is a very good fit, as you can see there. Nice tight fit. Obviously that's got to be sanded to profile, but now I can glue that block in place. Now one other thing to talk about at the front end is that obviously the motor is going to be fitted to the plate there, and the motor mounts with bolts going through to my T-nuts that are held in the ply motor mount plate, and then the ring goes on. Now I think the intention was that this gets stuck the ring gets stuck to F1 and that's it. The problem is I am then going to fit my scale fan into there. And once that's in place, it's going to be quite difficult for me to get at the motor to replace it or to take it out for maintenance or whatever, because the bolts are going to be recessed right back there. May not be difficult to get it out, but it would be certainly awkward to get it back in because I've got to hold the bolts back in there. So what I thought about doing was make this removable. So to achieve that, what I've done is, if you can see inside let me get a pencil to point them out. You see inside there, I've drilled some holes, 4 holes. And I'm going to use screws to mount this back to F1, and that'll hold that in place. I need this block to be located first of all, because that is the locator for my ring. Okay, so that's the next thing I've got to do. I'll glue this in place off camera. Hopefully you can see now I've got the fuselage mounted tail down on the ground, and what I want to be able to do is to fit these little screws, which are called servo screws. It's just, you can see there they are, and you can see they've got a socket head so I can drive them with an Allen key. But I just want to make pilot holes for them first of all. So I'm carefully going to drill down into F1. I'm going to put one in first of all to locate it. So it helps. I've got the block in, the chin block, as we know, underneath to hold it there. I've now got one of those screws in place, so I can now drill here. Yeah, nice and firm. Holds that in place. Now when I put my fan in, I've measured the position of those screws. Just come a bit closer so you can see them. You can see those screws now, and they're not hidden by the fan, so I should be able to, if I want to detach the whole thing, just put my screwdriver in there and unscrew, and then this whole thing will come out, which is a lot better, I think. If you're not fitting this, then you're going to get access to the motor quite easily anyway through here, and that's not going to be a big issue for you, so you don't need to make it removable. So I've taken the cowl ring off. That doesn't need to be on there at the moment. But one thing I haven't done yet is see whether the battery will fit. I made a big song and dance about will the battery fit, won't it fit? Do I have to make a compartment here or an access for it to get to the battery underneath? And I decided that I think there's enough room for the 3700 battery to go in. So now's the moment of truth. Bearing in mind I've got the bottom block in, I've got the engine mount in place. So the battery, first bit of good news is the battery doesn't touch any bolts or any bits protruding from the motor there. That's really good. Let's just put these cables down here. Okay, and that's the battery sitting quite comfortably there. But will the hatch fit? So let's slide the hatch through to there. Click, it's gone in place. Ta-da! It fits. So when we look at that, that battery can actually move. There is wiggle room. So yeah, it's good. It will fit in there without a problem. Obviously what I'm going to have to do is support that battery. I may just put, let's just take this out of the way. Thinking out loud now, I may just put a couple of rails going down from F2 to the motor mount there, just a couple of side rails, if like cheeks I suppose, that will form sides that the battery can slide down between. Yeah, I may do that. I'll see what offcuts we get from the kit, but there's plenty of balsa there. So, but yes, I'm pleased with that. Really, it's good, as they say, when a plan comes together and that works. So that's a result. Before we fit the thin ply cowl, we've got to put the little balsa strips in place between F1 and F2, which will give the ring support when we come to mount it. So what I'm going to do now is just mark one there. I'm just going to double check that measurement on the other side. Obviously it should be the same, which it is. Now I'm going to cut all of them to that length. Get my cutting board, and again I'm going to use my razor saw to cut these to length. They're all cut now. I'm guessing they're going to be a tight fit based on my experience of the rest of this kit. Extremely good fit. Yeah, so that's how they're going to go all the way round. So I'll proceed to glue them in place. Once you've glued them in place, they have to be sanded. Now a tip here, obviously when you're sanding, you're going to be sanding to the curve, but as you press down, these will press down as well. So you actually will end up with it curved that way rather than straight. So literally, what I suggest is just hold your finger underneath as you sand that down and slightly press up, not too much, and that will ensure that you get a nice straight sand on there. I've also got to sand now the chin block here to profile, because obviously the ply sheet for the cowl goes right the way around there. So I'll do that off camera.